Dr. Kethrill's four eyes blinked in sequence as he stared at the holographic display floating before his examination table. The human patient lay unconscious, breathing steadily through the oxygen mask that covered most of his face. What should have been a routine medical consultation had turned into something far more complicated. The human called himself Marcus Chen, a freight hauler who had collapsed during a routine cargo inspection at Nexus Station. Standard protocol required accessing the patient's medical records from his homeworld before treatment. Simple enough, or so Kethrill had thought. The Zenthari physician's elongated fingers danced across the haptic interface, entering the standard request codes he had used thousands of times before. Patient identification confirmed. Species classification confirmed. Homeworld designation: Earth, Sol System, Terran Federation. Request submitted to Central Medical Database. Kethrill expected the usual flood of data: vaccination records, genetic markers, known allergies, previous treatments. Instead, a single line of text appeared in stark red lettering across his screen. Access denied. Classification level insufficient. His secondary arms twitched with irritation. In 300 cycles of medical practice across 17 different star systems, he had never encountered a patient whose records required special clearance. Even the war veterans from the hegemony conflicts had accessible files, though heavily redacted. He tried again, this time using his senior physician credentials. The same message appeared, accompanied by a soft chime that somehow managed to sound condescending. Computer, explain access denial for patient medical records, Kethrill spoke aloud, his translator rendering his native clicks and whistles into standard galactic. Patient records classified under Deathworld Protocol Directive 77 Alpha. Clearance level Crimson or higher required for access. Deathworld Protocol. Kethrill's primary eyes widened, while his secondary ones focused on the unconscious human. He had heard whispers of such classifications in medical conferences, usually dismissed as administrative paranoia. Worlds so dangerous that their inhabitants required special handling procedures. But humans were traders, engineers, diplomats. They served on mixed-species crews throughout the galaxy. They seemed perfectly normal, if perhaps unusually energetic and prone to taking unnecessary risks. Hardly the stuff of Deathworld legends. Computer, what clearance level do I possess? Current user clearance. Standard medical, level 4. What clearance level is required for Deathworld protocol access? Level 9 Crimson authorization required. Current user does not possess sufficient credentials. Kethrill's tail lashed with frustration. Level 9 clearances were reserved for military intelligence and senior Federation officials. He was a doctor, not a spy. All he wanted was to treat his patient properly. The human stirred on the examination table, mumbling something in his native language. Kethrill quickly checked the vital signs display. Heart rate elevated but stable. Brain activity showing signs of consciousness returning. The translator would need a few moments to calibrate once the patient was fully awake. Computer, can you provide general treatment guidelines for this species without accessing full records? Basic physiological data available. Warning, Deathworld species may exhibit extreme reactions to standard treatments. Recommend consultation with specialized xenobiology department. Extreme reactions. Kethrill's medical training told him to be cautious, but his patient was clearly in distress. The bio readings showed elevated stress hormones and signs of what appeared to be withdrawal from some unknown substance. The human's eyes opened, pupils dilating as they adjusted to the medical bay's lighting. Kethrill noticed they were brown, an unusual shade that seemed to shift between amber and chocolate depending on the angle. Most species had static eye coloration. Where? The human began, his voice rough. The translator kicked in after a moment. Where am I? You are in Medical Bay 7 aboard Nexus Station, Kethrill replied, keeping his voice calm and professional. I am Dr. Kethrill. You collapsed during a cargo inspection. Can you tell me your name? Marcus Chen, I'm captain of the freight hauler Persistence. The human tried to sit up, then immediately grabbed his head. God, feels like someone's drilling holes in my skull. Kethril made notes on his pad. The human's pain tolerance seemed remarkably low for someone supposedly from a Deathworld. Can you describe what you were doing before you collapsed? Standard stuff. We'd just finished a 6-month haul from the Outer Rim. I was reviewing the manifest when everything went sideways. Marcus's breathing was becoming labored. Doc, I need my meds. Should be in my personal kit. I cannot administer unknown medications without proper analysis. What condition are you treating? Marcus's face went pale, which Kethril found fascinating from a medical perspective. The rapid shift in blood flow patterns was unlike anything he had seen in other species. It's not a condition exactly, Marcus said slowly. Look, just contact Earth Medical Authority. They'll explain everything. I have attempted to access your medical records. They are classified beyond my clearance level. The human's reaction was immediate and startling. His heart rate spiked to levels that should have been fatal for most species. Perspiration beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the medical bay. Most disturbing of all, his scent changed, becoming sharp and acrid in a way that made Kethril's instincts scream warnings about predators. How long have I been unconscious? Marcus demanded. Approximately 4 hours. Marcus closed his eyes and muttered something that the translator couldn't parse. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression. A hardness that hadn't been there before. Doctor, I need you to listen very carefully. Contact Admiral Sarah Voss at Terran Federation Medical Command. Tell her Marcus Chen is having an episode. Tell her... He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. Tell her code Nightfall. I am not qualified to contact military personnel. I am simply trying to treat... Marcus grabbed Kethril's lower arm with surprising speed. The human's grip was uncomfortably strong, and the doctor could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Doc, you seem like a good person, but if you don't make that call in the next 30 minutes, you're going to learn exactly why our records are classified. There was something in Marcus's voice that made Kethril's survival instincts activate. Despite his rational mind insisting that humans were civilized beings, every primitive part of his brain was suddenly convinced he was in the presence of an apex predator. I will attempt to contact the appropriate authorities, Kethril managed. Marcus released his arm and lay back down. Thank you. And, Doctor, you might want to clear the adjacent medical bays, just in case. In case of what? But Marcus had closed his eyes and didn't answer. The biometric displays showed his vital signs were becoming increasingly erratic, and new readings were appearing that Kethril didn't recognize. Whatever was happening to his patient was accelerating. Kethril quickly moved to his communication console. If Admiral Voss could provide the answers he needed, then protocol could wait. His patient's life might depend on it. As he entered the connection request, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to learn something that would change his understanding of humans forever. The Deathworld protocol wasn't just bureaucratic classification, it was a warning. The question was, a warning about what? The communication array chimed as it established connection with Terran space. In a few moments, he would have his answers. Kethril just wasn't sure he was ready for them. Behind him, Marcus Chen began to convulse, and the medical bay's containment systems automatically activated. Through the transparent aluminum barriers, Kethril could see his patient's muscles bulging in ways that defied normal human physiology. Whatever was happening, it was just beginning. Admiral Sarah Voss's face materialized on the holographic display with military precision. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back severely, and her blue eyes held the kind of weight that came from making impossible decisions. Even through the quantum communication relay, Kethril could sense an aura of competence and barely contain tension. Dr. Kethril, I presume, she said without preamble. "You mentioned code Nightfall. How long has Captain Chen been without his suppressants?" "Suppressants?" Kethral's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "Admiral, I require clarification. What exactly am I treating?" Behind him, the containment field hummed as Marcus thrashed against the restraints. His muscles had expanded to nearly twice their normal size, and the metal framework of the examination table was beginning to groan under the stress. "Doctor, I'm authorizing emergency medical clearance. Your station's AI should be receiving the unlock codes now." Voss's expression was grim. "What you're about to learn is classified at the highest levels. The survival of every human in space may depend on your discretion." The medical display suddenly flooded with data. Kethral's eyes widened as he absorbed the information. Genetic modifications, chemical dependency, behavioral conditioning protocols, and underneath it all a single terrifying truth. Humans weren't just from a death world, they were engineered by it. "This is impossible," Kethral breathed, scrolling through readout after readout. "These modification levels would require generations of selective breeding and genetic manipulation." "Not manipulation, Doctor. Evolution, but not the natural kind." Voss leaned forward. "Tell me, what do you know about Earth's history?" "Standard databases indicate a peaceful world that joined the galactic community 3 centuries ago. Agricultural planet with diverse ecosystems." Voss laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the sanitized version we released to the public. The truth is considerably more complex." The containment field sparked as Marcus's fist struck it. The impact should have shattered every bone in his hand, but the biometrics showed only elevated adrenaline levels. "Earth wasn't always a peaceful world, Doctor. For most of human history, our planet was exactly what the classification suggests. A death world, but not from environmental factors. From us." Kethral's secondary arms trembled as he processed the medical data. "These genetic markers suggest enhanced muscle density, accelerated healing, increased pain tolerance, and... what is this compound? Rage 7? A combat stimulant produced naturally by unmodified humans during extreme stress. Makes them stronger, faster, and completely without fear or self-preservation instincts." Voss's voice was clinical, but Kethral could hear the underlying exhaustion. "Doctor, for 6,000 years of recorded history, humans did nothing but wage war against each other. We developed weapons that could destroy planets. We created plagues that could wipe out entire species. We turned warfare into an art form." Marcus's convulsions were becoming more violent. The restraints designed to hold beings 3 times human size were beginning to fray. "But humans serve throughout the galaxy," Kethral protested. "They're peaceful traders, engineers, explorers." "Because we made them that way." Voss pulled up a secondary display showing brain scans. "Every human who leaves Earth undergoes a procedure we call the pacification protocol. Chemical suppressants that regulate hormone production, genetic therapy that dampens aggressive instincts, behavioral conditioning that reinforces cooperative social norms. What you think of as normal human behavior is actually the result of the most comprehensive psychological modification program in galactic history." The implications hit Kethral like a plasma bolt. "You're telling me that every human in space is chemically lobotomized?" "Yes. The suppressants must be renewed every 6 months, or the original human nature begins to reassert itself." "Original nature?" Admiral Voss was quiet for a moment. "Doctor, imagine a species that considered nuclear warfare an acceptable way to settle territorial disputes. A people who would literally fight to the last individual over resources, ideology, or sometimes just because they were bored. We called it the human condition." Marcus's eyes opened. They were no longer brown. They were black, with pupils so dilated that the iris had vanished entirely. When he smiled, Kethral noticed that his teeth seemed sharper than before. "Admiral," Kethral said urgently, "I think he's becoming conscious." Conscious isn't the right word. Dr. Kethril, you need to understand something crucial. The person you've been speaking with, Marcus Chen, freight captain, that's not who's waking up in your medical bay. I don't understand. Marcus Chen is a constructed identity built from chemical conditioning and behavioral modification. The suppressants don't just control aggression, they create an entirely artificial personality. When they wear off, the original human consciousness resurfaces. The restraints snapped. Marcus, or whatever was wearing Marcus's face, sat up slowly. His movements were fluid in a way they hadn't been before, like a predator testing its range of motion. The medical equipment that had been reading his vital signs now showed patterns Kethril had never seen. "Hello, doctor," the thing said in Marcus's voice, but the tone was completely different. Where Marcus had been concerned and cooperative, this version sounded amused by some private joke. "Thank you for taking such good care of my other self." "Marcus?" Kethril ventured. "Oh, Marcus is still here, but he's not driving anymore." The human stood up, casually tearing away the remaining restraints. "I suppose introductions are in order. I'm what your admiral there would call an unmodified human. You can think of me as Marcus's original personality." Admiral Voss's voice cut through the calm. "Doctor, do not engage with the patient. Activate emergency containment and evacuate the medical bay immediately." The human laughed. Sarah, always so dramatic. "I'm not going to hurt the good doctor. He's been very helpful." He turned to Kethril. "Though I am curious, what would you like to know about real humans?" Despite every instinct screaming at him to run, Kethril's scientific curiosity won out. "The modifications, they're really that extensive?" "You have no idea." The human flexed his hands, and Kethril heard the bones pop in a way that suggested they could be used as weapons. "Everything you think you know about human physiology is based on our modified cousins. Shall I give you a demonstration?" Before Kethril could respond, the human grabbed the edge of the examination table, a solid piece of tritanium designed to support beings weighing several tons, and crumpled it like paper. "Enhanced muscle density," he explained conversationally. "Also, our bones are actually about 40% denser than your records indicate. Our pain tolerance is roughly equivalent to your anesthetics. Our healing factor can close minor wounds in hours instead of days." "This is incredible," Kethril breathed, his scientific mind racing despite his fear. "Oh, that's just the physical stuff." The human's smile widened. "The really interesting part is what happens to our brains when we stop being nice." Admiral Voss's voice was urgent now. "Dr. Kethril, you must evacuate. Security teams are en route." "Security teams?" The human tilted his head. "Sarah, you wound me. When have I ever been unreasonable? The Kepler station incident, the Titan mining colony, the—" Okay. Point taken." The human waved dismissively. "But Dr. Kethril has been genuinely helpful. I'm not going to hurt someone who showed kindness to Marcus." Kethril realized something profound was happening. "You speak of Marcus as if he's a different person. Because he is. The modification process doesn't just suppress our natural instincts, it creates an entirely new personality matrix. Marcus genuinely believes he's a peaceful freight captain who enjoys reading poetry and collecting alien artifacts. He has memories of a childhood that never happened and emotional responses that were programmed into him. But you share the same body. Think of it like multiple personality disorder, except one of the personalities is artificially created and maintained through constant chemical intervention." The human sat down on the twisted remains of the examination table. "Marcus will wake up in a few days with no memory of this conversation. He'll take his suppressants, and I'll go back to sleep." "How many humans know about this?" Admiral Voss answered before the human could. "Less than 1,000, galaxy-wide. The pacification protocol was implemented before first contact with alien species. We couldn't risk the galaxy learning what humans were really like. Kethril was beginning to understand the scope of what he was witnessing. You created an entire false version of your species. We had to. The human's expression grew serious. Doctor, you seem like a decent being. Let me tell you what unmodified humans are capable of. We can function for weeks without sleep if necessary. We can survive injuries that would kill most species. We feel physical and emotional pain, but we can compartmentalize it in ways that let us continue fighting even when logically we should be incapacitated. But more than that, Admiral Voss continued, unmodified humans are persistent hunters. If something threatens them, they will track it across the galaxy if necessary. They don't forgive, they don't forget, and they never ever give up. The human nodded approvingly. Sarah gets it. We evolved on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. Our response was to become unkillable. He looked directly at Kethril. Doctor, your species produces offspring every few years and cares for them until they reach maturity, correct? Yes, standard reproductive cycle. Humans produce offspring constantly. We can have multiple children per year if resources allow. Do you know why? Kethril was afraid to ask, but his scientific training compelled him. Survival adaptation? Because we expected most of them to die violently. The human's voice was matter-of-fact. Everything about human biology and psychology is designed around the assumption that we're going to face extinction-level threats on a regular basis. We're a species that weaponized paranoia and turned persistence into a superpower. This is why the records are classified, Admiral Voss said. If the galaxy learned what humans really are, they would either try to exterminate us or worship us as gods of war. Neither outcome serves galactic peace. Kethril looked between the comm display and the unmodified human sitting calmly in his ruined medical bay. What happens now? Now you understand why that stamp on our medical files exists, the human said. We're not classified because we're dangerous, though we are. We're classified because we're necessary. Necessary? Admiral Voss nodded grimly. There are threats coming, Doctor. Things moving in the dark between galaxies. When they arrive, the galaxy is going to need its monsters. The human smiled again, and this time Kethril saw something that made his blood run cold. It was the smile of something that had never been prey. Until then, we'll keep pretending to be the peaceful traders and engineers you think you know, the human said. But remember this conversation, Doctor. Remember that when the time comes, humanity will be ready for war. The security teams arrived to find Marcus Chen unconscious again, his vital signs returning to normal ranges. The medical bay was a wreck, but Dr. Kethril assured them it was just equipment failure. As they carried Marcus to a secure medical facility, Kethril couldn't stop thinking about what he had learned. The galaxy was protected by a lie, a beautiful, necessary lie that kept the peace. But lies, no matter how necessary, always had a cost. And Kethril suspected that cost would come due sooner than anyone expected. 6 months after the incident in Medical Bay 7, Dr. Kethril had almost convinced himself it had been a hallucination brought on by exposure to exotic radiation. Almost. The official report stated that Captain Marcus Chen had suffered from a rare metabolic disorder that caused temporary psychotic episodes. He had been treated, his medication adjusted, and returned to duty with a clean bill of health. The destroyed medical equipment was attributed to a cascade failure in the containment systems. But Kethril remembered the strength in those hands, the intelligence in those black eyes, the absolute certainty that he had been speaking to something that had never learned to fear anything in the universe. Now, as he stood in the command center of Nexus Station watching the tactical displays, he wondered if the galaxy's darkest hour had finally arrived. "Report!" Admiral Voss demanded as she materialized on the main holographic display. Even through the quantum relay, Kethril could see the exhaustion in her features. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days. Station Commander Tythak, a hegemony veteran whose species had never lost a war until they met humans, gestured to the sensor readouts with 3 of his 6 arms. Long-range sensors detected the fleet 6 hours ago, approximately 40,000 vessels of unknown configuration. They're maintaining position at the edge of the Kepler system. Unknown configuration? Voss leaned forward. Our databases contain technical specifications for every known spacefaring species in the galaxy. That's the problem, Admiral. These ships don't match any known designs. The energy signatures are completely foreign. More importantly, they're not responding to any communication attempts. Kethril studied the tactical display from his position at the medical station. The unknown fleet formed a perfect sphere around the outer planets of the Kepler system. Whatever they were, they understood military formations. Size estimates? Voss asked. Individual vessels range from 2 to 20 kilometers in length. The largest ship is... Tythak paused, double-checking his readings. 87 kilometers long and approximately 20 kilometers wide. A collective silence fell over the command center. The largest ship in the galactic fleet measured only 12 kilometers. Admiral, Communications Officer Prell's voice cracked slightly. We're receiving a transmission. It's addressing the entire galaxy. Put it through. The main display flickered, then resolved into an image that made Kethril's 4 hearts skip several beats. The being on screen was vaguely humanoid, but stretched and elongated in ways that suggested a completely different evolutionary path. Its skin was a deep purple black, and its eyes were solid silver orbs that seemed to reflect light from sources that weren't visible. When it spoke, the words bypassed the translation systems entirely and appeared directly in everyone's minds. Greetings, children of this galaxy. We are the devourers of the 7th spiral. Your civilizations have grown beyond the boundaries set for developing species. This expansion will cease. Commander Tythak's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. Direct neural communication. They're bypassing our cognitive defenses. You will submit to harvesting protocols within 1 rotation of your primary star. Failure to comply will result in total sterilization of inhabited systems. This is not a negotiation. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Harvesting protocols? Prell whispered. Admiral Voss was already moving. Commander Tythak, I'm authorizing immediate evacuation of all civilian populations to core systems. Dr. Kethril, I need you to prepare medical facilities for potential casualties on a scale we've never seen. Admiral, Kethril found himself saying, what about the other option? Voss paused. What other option, Doctor? The classified records. The Deathworld protocol. You said humanity would be ready when the time came. The command center went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Several officers were looking at Voss with expressions of confusion, but Tythak's compound eyes were gleaming with something that might have been hope. Doctor, I'm not sure what you're referring to, Voss said carefully. Admiral, with respect, 40,000 unknown vessels just announced their intention to harvest our entire civilization. This seems like exactly the kind of situation that would require... Kethril paused, remembering Marcus's words. Monsters. Voss stared at him for a long moment, then she turned to the other officers. Clear the command center. I need to speak with Dr. Kethril privately. As the last officer left, Voss's entire demeanor changed. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it was something Kethril recognized from his encounter with the unmodified human. A cold, predatory calculation. How much do you remember about your patient, Doctor? Everything. The suppressants, the artificial personalities, the original human nature that your people keep locked away. And what would you say if I told you that we've already deployed our response to this threat? I would ask why the evacuation orders are still in effect. Voss smiled, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the thing that had worn Marcus Chen's face. Because even we don't know if we can control what we're about to unleash. The tactical display updated. A new contact was approaching the unknown fleet. A single human vessel, barely visible against the massive alien ships. That's the Persistence, Kethril breathed. Captain Chen's ship. Not exactly. Captain Chen is sedated in the medical bay. The ship is being operated by his original personality and a crew of volunteers who've had their pacification protocols permanently reversed. As they watched, the tiny human ship approached the alien formation. It should have been vaporized instantly by any reasonable defense system. Instead, the alien vessel seemed to simply ignore it. What are they doing? Reconnaissance. Unmodified humans have certain advantages when it comes to gathering intelligence. They can function in environments that would kill other species, they can infiltrate systems that depend on emotional or psychological screening, and they have an almost supernatural ability to find weaknesses in their enemies. The Persistence disappeared from sensors as it approached the largest alien vessel. Admiral, even if they gather useful intelligence, one ship against 40,000? Oh, Doctor, you still don't understand. Voss pulled up a secondary display showing the deployment of Terran Federation vessels. That's not one ship. That's the Advanced Scout. Kethril watched in amazement as contact after contact appeared on long-range sensors. Human ships were emerging from hyperspace throughout the galaxy, but not in the formations he expected. Instead of massive battle groups, they appeared to be individual vessels or small squadrons. How many ships are you deploying? Every single one we have. But more importantly, every single one is crewed by volunteers who've voluntarily given up their artificial personalities. You're unleashing your entire unmodified population. We're unleashing humanity, Doctor, the real version. And I should warn you, it's about to get very unpleasant for everyone involved. The communication array activated again. This time, the transmission was coming from the Persistence. Marcus Chen's face appeared on screen, but like before, Kethril could tell immediately that this wasn't the gentle freight captain he had treated. This version of Marcus was grinning with anticipation. Admiral, we've completed our survey of the alien fleet. They're impressive, but they have a problem. Which is, they've never fought anyone like us before. Their ships are designed for overwhelming force against static targets. Their tactics assume enemy forces will behave rationally when faced with superior numbers. Their psychology appears to be based on intimidation and submission. And, Marcus's grin widened, they just threatened the wrong species. The display showed the alien fleet beginning to move toward inhabited systems. 40,000 ships accelerating toward worlds containing trillions of innocent civilians. Then the human ships struck. What followed wasn't a battle in any conventional sense. Human vessels emerged from hyperspace inside the alien formations, ignoring their own safety to deliver devastating close-range attacks. They rammed alien ships at relativistic speeds. They detonated their own reactors to take out multiple targets. They performed maneuvers that should have killed their crews from acceleration forces alone. This is insane, Kethril breathed, watching human ships sacrifice themselves without hesitation. This is human warfare, Voss corrected. We don't fight to win, Doctor. We fight to make sure our enemies lose, regardless of the cost to ourselves. The alien fleet's perfect formations began to collapse as human ships swarmed through them like antibodies attacking an infection. For every human vessel destroyed, they took 3 or 4 alien ships with them. But it was the psychological effect that truly mattered. The aliens had expected surrender or, at worst, organized resistance. What they got instead was a species that treated their own deaths as acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of victory. "Incoming transmission from the alien flagship," Prell announced. The elongated being appeared again, but its composure was cracking. The silver eyes now showed something that might have been fear. "What manner of creatures are you? Your losses are unsustainable. Your tactics are irrational." Admiral Voss stepped forward. "We're humans, and you made a mistake when you threatened our families. We offer negotiation, territorial concessions, resource-sharing protocols." "No." Voss's voice was flat. "You said this wasn't a negotiation. You were right." The tactical display showed the alien fleet beginning to retreat, but human ships were pursuing them, not to capture or contain, to ensure complete destruction. "Admiral," Kethril said quietly, "when will you recall your forces?" "We won't. But the aliens are retreating. The threat is over." Voss turned to look at him, and Kethril saw something in her eyes that chilled him to his core. "Doctor, you still don't understand what unmodified humans are. We don't just defeat our enemies. We make sure they can never threaten anyone ever again." "You're talking about genocide." "We're talking about survival. Humanity learned long ago that mercy is a luxury species can only afford when they're strong enough to defend themselves. Today, we're defending the entire galaxy." The battle continued for 6 more hours. When it ended, there were no alien survivors. 40,000 ships and their crews had been completely destroyed by a human fleet that had lost nearly 60% of its own vessels. "The threat is eliminated," Voss announced to the galaxy. "All civilian evacuation orders are rescinded." As the communication ended, Kethril found himself alone with the Admiral's image. "What happens to your people now? The unmodified humans?" "They'll return to their bases. They'll submit to voluntary pacification protocol re-implementation. In a few days, they'll be back to being peaceful traders and engineers with no memory of what they've done. And the galaxy will never know what really saved them." "That's the idea, Doctor. The galaxy needs to believe it was saved by superior technology or brilliant strategy. They can't know it was saved by monsters who chose to be heroes." Voss paused, looking tired again. "Doctor, I have a favor to ask. In your medical reports about Captain Chen's incident, I need you to maintain the official story. Metabolic disorder, medication adjustment, equipment failure." "Of course, Admiral. But I have to ask, how long can you maintain this deception?" "As long as necessary. Hopefully forever." "And if another threat emerges?" Admiral Voss smiled that predatory smile again. "Then we'll remind the universe why humanity earned its classification as a Deathworld species. But until then, we'll keep pretending to be the peaceful neighbors everyone thinks they know." The transmission ended, leaving Kethril alone with his thoughts and his terrible new understanding. Humanity had saved the galaxy by unleashing its darkest nature, then voluntarily locked that nature away again. They were heroes and monsters, protectors and predators, all wrapped up in the bodies of beings who looked perfectly ordinary. As he began preparing his medical report, Kethril made a decision. He would keep humanity's secret, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. The galaxy was a safer place because humans were willing to bear the burden of being what others could not. But late at night, in the quiet of his quarters, Kethril sometimes wondered about the price of that protection. How long could humanity maintain the artificial personalities that kept them peaceful? What would happen if the pacification protocol ever failed on a large scale? Those questions kept him awake, staring into the darkness between the stars and hoping that the galaxy would never need its monsters again, but also hoping that if it did, humanity would once again choose to be the heroes the universe needed, regardless of the cost to their own souls. The secret would remain classified, stamped with warnings about Deathworld protocols and locked away from prying eyes. And perhaps that was for the best. Some truths were too dangerous for a peaceful galaxy to know. But Kethril would remember. Someone had to.